From the EPR Creation Studio, this is Jason Staples bringing you the Unconquered podcast with Doc Staples. Hot Takes edition after Florida State loses the opener against Georgia Tech in Ireland. It's going to be a really long flight back for a disappointed Florida State team that had much higher hopes for this opening of the season and the season in general. Georgia Tech 24, Florida State 21. As always, this podcast brought to you by EPR Creations, bringing you the best of internet development and website marketing for an affordable price, by Luis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida, and Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage, serving Florida, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Give him a holler. If you're anywhere, and he'll make sure you're taken care of. Well, let's get to it. And obviously a very disappointing open to the season for most of the listeners of this podcast. And really, a lot of things, though, in this game that went kind of as expected. Just a few things that didn't go as needed, and this was the result. So might as well get to it. First of all, go back to the preview. And what I said in the preview is that they have a very big and experienced offensive line, which should be, maybe one of the best 3 offensive lines that Florida State plays this year. And we're a very, very dangerous football team because of the combination of that and the fastest group of skill guys that Florida State was going to play this year. And that all was exactly what we saw. Their offensive line and, just general running game dominated this football game on that side of the ball. Now, I want to be very clear up front. When you look at this game was primarily lost on the offensive side for Florida State. You can't score 21 points in modern FBS power conference football and expect to win games. You got to score 30 points. That's got to be the number of points you score every game. But we'll get to the offense in the second half of the show. So I am going to lead with the defense because you felt coming in that defense was going to be what you hung your hat on this season. That you were going to be able to stop teams and be able to make teams one-dimensional, be able to take away teams' best dimension, and then be able to dictate and then allow your offense enough room to grow early in the season with all those new pieces, all the things that need to get better in the passing game and everything else. We knew there were questions on that side, but the thing that you felt confident about coming into this game was the quality players on the defensive line, the outstanding secondary, a team that's been able to tackle really well in the open field in recent years. Those were things you could hang your hat on. And, we talked about this in the pregame, in the preview. This was strength on strength. Florida State's defense against Georgia Tech's offensive line and running game, and all the various eye candy and all that stuff that they do to put your defense off balance. And my thought was, as good as Georgia Tech is in those areas, and they're really good, they're going to win some games this year, even though that schedule is brutal. This is going to be a good football team this year. And I said that in the preview. It's a good football team and a good offense. I expected that Florida State, with the depth and the quality that they have in terms of bodies on the defensive line, would be able to more than match up well enough to force Georgia Tech to be able to throw the football to win the game. And they couldn't. Looking at this game, it's pretty simple on the defensive side what happened. Florida State was not able to stop the run in this game. On the defensive side, simple as that. Rushing success rate for Georgia Tech, 64%. There's your ball game on the defensive side. Power rushing attempts. So these are, short yardage rushing attempts, second and 2 or third and 2, these sorts of things. Georgia Tech got 5 out of 6 of those successful plays. You're not going to win a lot of football games when that happens. That's what you can't do in terms of, playing football in today's game. Average yards per carry for Georgia Tech in this game, 5.3 yards per carry. 36 rushing attempts for 5.3 yards per carry. That's your ball game, guys, on the defensive side. That's why they scored 24. And why they scored 24, I mean, this is the other thing. They scored 24, looking at total drives, in 7 drives. Normally, you're going to get 11 or 12 drives in a game. They were able to shorten this game because of a 7-minute and 53-second drive, a 6-minute and 22-second drive, a 6-minute and 33-second drive. These are long drives, and they scored on 4 of 7 drives. 3 touchdowns, 1 field goal on 7 drives. Florida State also scored on 4 of 7 drives, but 2 field goals and 2 touchdowns. So we'll get to that in terms of the offensive side later. But at the end of the day, if you're coming into this game feeling like Florida State was going to be able to win early and win this football game, which, I mean, again, I said it in the preview, said it in, earlier in the season. This was one of the maybe 4 most dangerous games, 5 most dangerous games, probably 4th most dangerous game for Florida State on this schedule. You still have Miami, you still have Clemson, you still have Notre Dame. I think this Georgia Tech team was probably the 4th one out of that group. But this is not a game that you should have lost. End of the day. It's not a game where, again, going strength on strength, you should be giving up 5.3 yards per play with the defensive line that you thought you had. Simple as that. Now, it's not just defensive line, but I will say, look, Darrell Jackson, Joshua Farmer, if those guys are supposed to be early entry, first round, second round type guys, I didn't see that today. Those guys got handled by the interior offensive line. Those 2 got handled. Actually, Daniel Lyons had some of the more obvious plays where he was able to get some leverage. But by and large, Florida State's defensive tackle position got handled by Georgia Tech in this game. And given what your strengths on this team are supposed to be, that's a bad sign. That's a bad thing. And then your edge guys, Peyton and Marvin Jones, they didn't really produce a whole lot of pressure. I mean, there was really 1 play, maybe 2 plays where they got much pressure. Now, part of that is because they just didn't get opportunities rushing the passer. And I actually thought Florida State made some mistakes by keeping Peyton in particular out there as much against the run. I thought they should have gone big against what Georgia Tech was doing. I mean, maybe even put Tomiwa out there, Durojai at edge at one point. But Lolohea was out on the field on most of the more successful defensive stops against the run. And I thought he probably should have played a little bit more in this game. Because frankly, Peyton, I said this in the offseason, that when I went back and I watched the Georgia game last year, Georgia was able to push Peyton around on the edge and was able to run at him in ways that were concerning coming into this year. And frankly, this is where Florida State badly missed Jared Verse in this game. Yes, they also missed Fisk in this game, but Jared Verse and his presence, the ability to create penetration and collapse everything against the run, not just against the pass, but to be a dynamite run defender from the edge, that was a big thing that was missing in this game. Those edges really didn't show up against the run or the pass, but against the run, they got pushed around a little bit. And then you combine that with what I thought was a less than, I don't want to pick on a guy, but Omar Graham had a rough outing. His eyes were in the wrong place a lot. He did have some trouble getting reached and getting off blocks, and just didn't do a whole lot in this game that made me confident that he really has earned a whole lot more time from here. And the other thing that showed up, and this was a place in a couple key spots, Georgia Tech did a really tremendous job of scheming against DJ Lundy, knowing what his weakness is. He's a really good player. But on 3rd and 2 or whatever it was, 3rd and 4, late in that game, when they were able to convert that with that little flat route to the back, by formation, they lined it up so that DJ Lundy would be one-on-one in coverage with that back, and they just made it a foot race to the outside and just had the quarterback throw the flat route. And that's, frankly, Lundy was just not fast enough to track with Jamal Haynes or either of their backups doing that. And that's one where last year you've got a faster backer there, and they may have to think about that depending on what teams are doing and what options they have in those situations this year. Maybe Lundy is a 2-down backer in this case because the book is out there and Georgia Tech exposed some of those things and they were able to take advantage of them in key spots. But they're going to have to figure out the linebacker position. I actually thought Blake Nicholson played reasonably. I need to go back and take a look at it because, it's hard. You can't see everything watching the game the way that we do. I'm watching it twice. Generally, I've got one screen on and then I watch the replay, watch the play again, 5 seconds later on the other screen so that I'm watching it twice with a chance to really pay attention to more than one thing. But still, I can't see everything at this stage. But I did think Nicholson showed up okay. Cam Riley moved fine, but really didn't burst out to me. And again, the secondary was fine. They just didn't have to. Georgia Tech didn't have to throw because they weren't able to stop the run. I mean, Haynes King was 11 for 16 for 146 yards. Okay. Not really a ton to worry about in the secondary, and most of that was on little pitch outs and shorties to the outside. That's good. But yeah, that was a problem. That was it boils down to that. So I'm going through here. Success rate running the football was 64%. Overall yards per play here for Georgia Tech. Let me get this comparison up for a second here. Yards per play, 6.5 yards per play. That's a losing effort from a defense, especially when most of that's on the ground. Yeah, I mean, defensively, this is one of the dangers when you're coming out of camp, and this is one of the things when you find out early about teams. This is one of the things that openers really expose, because when you're in camp, you only are playing against yourself. And it's sometimes hard to tell, like, are we that good at this spot? Or is the other side just not good enough to give us a challenge? And, this was a situation where I think everybody gave Florida State the benefit of the doubt about the defensive line being all world because of the bodies that they have and because of the players, the kinds of players that they have and the depth of players that they have. And then, you look at that and the offensive line had success against those guys in camp. And so you go, wow, Florida State's offensive line is going to be really good. If they're able to block these guys like this, then wow, because that's an elite defensive line. And then you get into a game against another team that has a really good offensive line and they push around your defensive line, and your offensive line, well, we'll talk about that next, doesn't really set the world on fire. And suddenly you might have that realization of like, honestly, maybe neither of the lines is as good as we thought. That might be where you are with this team. Now, I don't want to overreact to a game one last second kick win or loss. You don't want to overreact. Game one tells you a lot. And this is a team that was going to take some time to find its feet. And the hope was you get past Georgia Tech, you get the next 3 games where you can kind of find yourself, and then you get into the meat of your schedule and can really take off from there. That was the hope. So game one revealed some stuff. The question is, how much can you respond to that? So I'm not going to overreact, but I do think you have to ask some real questions about, okay, how good are your lines really? When, Georgia Tech, who's really good, like we knew Georgia Tech was really good on the offensive line. But their defensive line was not good last year. They had big bodies, couldn't get off blocks. And, look, they changed their defensive staff. They got a lot better. That was obvious. But are they going to be that much better this year defensively? Or was it a matter of Florida State's offensive line is just not as good as what the expectations were? It's totally possible that it's the latter. We will find out more on that as we move on. But I think it's time then to move into the second part of the show, and that is the offense side. Now, on the offensive side of the football, I mean, things were pretty offensive. And, there have been very few times, you all know very much. I mean, anybody who's listened to this show for a long time knows that I am loath to criticize play calling and all of that in games. I tend to emphasize that play calling is almost never the real issue. And there were a lot of issues in this game, but I do think actually the plan and sort of the not having good counters when they needed them, especially in the second half, that was a factor in this game. That was a factor. It's probably the second game since Mike Norvell has arrived at Florida State where when the game ended, I felt like he did not call the kind of game that you would expect. That his calls on the offensive side were a factor in why his team underperformed or lost. And, so I'm going to put that on the table up front. And there are a couple reasons for that. One is this team, you're averaging 3.2 yards per carry. So, that's a problem. You felt like coming into this game that you could pound almost any team on your schedule, that you could run the football, run the rock, play great defense, and that's it. Well, you weren't able to run the rock, and the defense wasn't great. It was okay. But it was not great. It was okay at best. But here's the thing. Once you're not able to run the rock and you're clearly not running the rock well, at a certain point, you've got to be able to counter. And they didn't have good counters in this game. And, I thought coming in, it was pretty obvious that they wanted to be a run the football, play action, throw downfield team. But they really didn't play action and throw downfield much in this game until the very end when they absolutely needed to. And then they had some success. I actually thought there was something to build with there from DJU and those wide receivers in the fourth quarter. But prior to that was a problem. So that first drive, I think to some extent, that first drive kind of suckered everybody. Because, they ran it fine. 56 yards rushing on that first drive. They averaged 7.1 yards per play on that in the first quarter. And then second quarter, 3.5 yards per play. Third quarter, 2.8 yards per play. And then finally in the fourth quarter, they started to throw the football a little bit, but that it was kind of too late a little bit by that last drive. So yeah, I'm getting texts right now. Sorry. It's the sort of thing that happens on air immediately after a loss. But I felt like in this game, they needed to run the football well, but if they didn't run the football well, the other thing that they absolutely needed to do was get DJ Uiagalelei into a good rhythm. They needed to have him feeling comfortable. And I felt like they never really got that. That never really happened until the last drive that they had the football. And then he was able to throw them down the field. And on third down a bunch of times. And that's the thing. When I talk about getting a quarterback in rhythm and giving him opportunities, my general philosophy on this, and I've said this for years, my general philosophy is that if you don't really trust your quarterback, or if you have if you are more limited in the passing game, you need to throw the football on first down more often, not less. And in this game, they ran it too many times on first down. I'm trying to find the number of first downs that they what their ratio was in terms of run pass on first down. Give me just a second. So they had what, 21 opportunities on first down, and they ran it 12 times and threw it 13, and that includes that last drive. I think they need it. And by the way, when I'm talking about throwing it, I'm not just talking about throwing it, a quick little thing on a screen or whatever. That sounds like, very balanced, 12 rushes, 13 throws on first down. But when some of those throws are RPO throws on the edge and they're just, little dumps to the back and that sort of thing, the reason I'm talking about this is you're not challenging the defense down the field to do something other than play coming forward. And that's really the thing that Georgia Tech was able to do in this game, is they were able to play coming forward. They played downhill. After that first drive where Florida State was able to gash them pretty good in the running game, after that, Georgia Tech played downhill basically the rest of the way. And that was not great, right? They were able to limit Florida State's run game, again, to 3.2 yards per play. And also, if we want to break this out, the success rate on rushing for Florida State was 33%. I talked in the season preview, what this team was going to hang its hat on, what it was going to depend on, was being a success rate team on first down, especially, and to be able to run the football and stay ahead of the chains. This team was behind the chains most of the game. And in power rushing, they were fine, but they had 7 runs stuffed. That's not good enough. So to me, I felt like they took too long to give a couple opportunities to throw downfield and force that defense to respect you downfield and in sort of that intermediate area and all of that. They didn't do it. Now, how much of that is Mike Norvell and how much of that is DJU? I need to go back and take a look at, at the copy on this. I need to look at the film, but I think it was a little bit of a mix. And I think one of the reasons we saw what we saw from DJ on this, or what we saw in terms of the play calling on this, was because Mike recognizes some of those limitations. There's one in particular that was actually highlighted by Jesse Palmer. Yeah, Jaylen Brown on a deep dig route, just your standard basic is what it's called. Basic route. So it's just a dig over the middle, and it's on a dagger concept or something along the lines of a dagger concept, where you have a seam route that clears out the coverage. The dagger, the basic comes behind it, and you just stick that right in there over the backers. And that's one of the easiest throws in football for a quarterback. And for whatever reason, DJU, who initially his eyes were on that, pulled away from it and threw the ball out of bounds on the other side, which should have been his second look, second read, as you would say, in the progression there. That's one where you've just got to take the easy stuff on the basic there. And again, that's a big play to a receiver who's got a chance to run through it if you locate it. And there were opportunities that they missed. And, you look at the one where Benson runs right by the corner and you throw it 3 yards out of bounds. And that one's not on the receiver. The receiver was in proper position and the quarterback just threw it out of bounds. Give him a chance. So, this is where you got to see some of those limitations from DJ. You got to see, a little bit of I thought there was a level of discomfort as a play caller that you saw in terms of, comfort level with the quarterback and, what you can do as an offense. And it's not just with the quarterback, it's with the passing game in general, with those wide receivers and everything. There wasn't a lot of trust there. And so, this was a very conservative game plan. And I thought it would be a conservative game plan. And the problem is, like I said, I would have called it that way initially, but once you're getting stuffed in the run, you can't just keep running it on first down, or you can't keep going to that well when they're coming downhill and they're doing those things. You've got to start working on getting your quarterback in rhythm and taking some of those first down play action opportunities on whatever he feels most comfortable with. So yeah, that's one thing. And again, I may go back and look at it and go, in hindsight, the calls made less of a difference than I thought. But this is the hot takes. And at present, when I'm looking at this, I'm seeing this and saying, well, they they didn't have good counters built in for if that didn't work. Because, like I said, I would have done this initially. That's how I would have tried to run it. But you have to have some counters after that starts getting stuffed. One other thing, and you know, sort of in defense of the coaching staff on this, it's harder to have more counters in play when you only have seven drives. And when you score on 4 of your 7 drives, well, I mean, that's not far. It's not far off. So, you know, I'm not at a point where I'm saying this is the death knell for this season for Florida State. They did put themselves in a position where they're going to be battling uphill the whole season. But there's still enough pieces that they could start to figure out some things and figure out what this team is and move forward. You know, I compared what this team might be to kind of a 2009 Bama type approach of pound the rock and play great defense, and that's what they were going to try to do. You also have to remember that 2010 Bama was exactly the same formula and went 10-3. So, you know, that's the thing. If you don't have sufficient explosiveness and you have enough small issues that come up, you can lose those games on the margin. And this is one that they lost on the margin. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see how they respond from this. They've got 3 opportunities here against teams that really are, as I mentioned in the season preview, in the sizable advantage territory, or at least were in the preseason. That was my thought. We'll see what happens as they bounce back and whether they find sort of their identity, and if they figure out how they can make DJ comfortable and get him to a place where he's able to find some rhythm and to find some rhythm with some receivers. And if they do that, then this team can start to blossom. But it's going to be an uphill climb from this point forward. And the players that you expected to be your bell cow players on the defensive line and on the offensive line, those guys are going to have to figure out whether they want to play football, whether they want to actually step forward and take care of business the way that they need to on that. Otherwise, you're going to be in a position where you're not going to come anywhere close to your season goals. So, yeah, I think that'll do for me here. Not really a whole lot of reason to keep talking about this on the hot takes until I've taken a closer look at a few other things. Feel free to send in your questions and whatnot, and I'll do some mailbag stuff as well on my retrospective once I take a closer look at this, probably Monday or Tuesday, and then we'll be back into our regular season schedule. So, as always, thank you for listening. Thanks to my sponsors and Patreon folks and everybody else. This is Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm your host, Doc Staples. Thanks for listening. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please leave a 5-star rating over at Apple Podcasts and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Post and repost episodes on social media and tell a friend. And if you haven't left a review in a while, do it again. It really does help the visibility of the podcast. Before we go, I'd also like to thank my advertising partners once more. That's EPR Creations, Louis Marquez of Keller Williams Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida, and Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage, serving Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky. You can also stop by the Unconquered Shop at unconqueredpodcast.com, where you can buy stickers, pins, magnets, t-shirts, and other swag. And thanks also to all those supporters over at Patreon, where I post video analysis and field questions for the podcast. I am especially grateful to those above the dynasty level. That is Andrew Garrett, Brian Leininger, Neil Cook, Casey Kidd, Chris Chartrand, Dave Blair, Hector Cartagena, Jack Horton, Jimmy Van, Jonathan Kennedy, Keith Cheney, Lee Caswell, Tyler Kashishke, Vince Calandra, and Bert Bertoldi. You all are far more generous than I deserve. I'm really grateful. Thanks to you all. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm your host, Jason Staples. Thanks for listening and thanks for your support. I made this.